Hi, everybody. So, describing a work of art or a piece of visual culture might seem laughably easy or simple. You just list its features, right? But in fact, a description, or at least a thoughtful description, is a result of a number of choices and decisions. For example, which features need mentioning at the outset, and which are less important? And how exactly to describe that color used, or that texture, or a figure's expression, or the tonal effect of a work. Most effective descriptions, then, are consciously structured to anticipate an audience's needs, and they use language intentionally to create an effective and responsible account of the subject at hand. A good description usually starts with an awareness of one's intended reader or listener. Of course, pretty much anybody will expect to find certain aspects of an artwork discussed near the beginning of a description. If we don't mention the artist, the date, the medium, the scale, and maybe the location of the work, we'll probably have a confused or even a frustrated listener or reader on our hands. But once we've gotten those basic elements in place, we might shape our description a bit more precisely. If we're speaking to our roommate, we might be relatively casual and use a few technical terms given their similar background in the arts. On the other hand, if we're describing the same work of art to a relative of ours who has little experience in the arts, we might use a democratic vocabulary and accent certain basic features. You can actually see this play out online as well, as videos constructed for a mass audience often describe works of art in simple, concrete, accessible ways, while those intended for niche audiences sometimes employ a more specialist vocabulary and take certain features for granted. Anyway, after you've developed a sense of your intended audience, you'll want to think carefully about what to include in your description. What's worth mentioning, what's not? We can't hope to account for every feature of a work of art, especially in the case of really complex objects, and so we'll need to make some conscious choices. And one way of doing that is to think in terms of what philosophers sometimes call standard and exceptional features. Standard features are elements that are entirely common and, as a result, unremarkable. For instance, if we're describing this work by Picasso, which is now part of MoMA's collection, we don't really need to remark on the fact that it's rectangular. Most oil paintings are, after all. Likewise, we probably don't need to emphasize the fact that the boy has hair on his head. After all, most boys do. These are standard features, in other words, and we can more or less take them for granted. Instead, we'll probably want to focus on exceptional features, that is, aspects that aren't necessarily common. The fact that we see a nude boy with a horse, that's an exceptional feature of this painting. So too are those thick black outlines, which are neither realistic or typical of all painters. Once you've got that distinction down, you might also think about internal and external features of the work or image. Internal features are aspects of a work that are visually apparent. We can discern them simply by looking at the object. So, for example, if we're describing the memorable "can't help myself," viewed here, we might refer to the scale and to the motions of the robotic arm, or the translucency of the plexiglass enclosure, or the color of the viscous fluid that pools at the base of the work. These are all internal features. They're part of the work. But we might also want to emphasize some external features as well, aspects that aren't actually visible, but are nonetheless important. For instance, this work was conceived and designed by the Chinese artists Sun Yuan and Peng Yu, and was made in 2016. These external features aren't visually obvious, but they're well worth including in a description, just as the physical context of the work, here installed at the 2019 Venice Biennale, or the excited reactions of viewers might also be. After you've thought closely about what you want to include in your description, then, you might think as well about the effect you want to achieve. What do you want your reader or listener to take away from your description? And how will you make it compelling or interesting? Here it's worth giving special attention to your opening and your closing sentences, for they'll often have the most profound influence. You might also think about describing the general tone or the effect of the work. Is it playful? Is it melancholy? Kitschy? Summarizing a work's general effect can be quite useful. And so too can a close attention to the words that you use. Some writers aim, intentionally, at a very neutral phrasing, preferring to let the work speak for itself. That's understandable, but other writers, assuming that any description will inevitably be subjective, work to seek out words that convey a precise sense of the work before them. Peter Schjeldahl, the chief art critic for the New Yorker magazine, and also a professional poet, offers a useful example here. In describing the paintings of Willem de Kooning, Schjeldahl once offered a virtuosic account of the artist's color choices. Quote, "There are screechy yellows, electric blues, boudoir pinks, and, as painter friends assure me, two of the most ungovernable hues in the painter's kit, alizarin crimson and phthalo green. These are dye-like synthetic pigments, transparent like nail polish, and viciously intense. They affect other colors the way garbage cans kicked downstairs would affect chamber music." Certainly, Schjeldahl's description here is far from neutral or objective, but his thoughtful word choices give us a powerful sense of how he, at least, saw the painting. In the end, then, there's never one single correct description of any work of art or visual culture. Descriptions, though, done well, reflect the perceived interests and needs of the reader and listener, and they give a sense of the describer's reactions. In the process, thoughtful descriptions also involve a series of deliberate decisions and choices, and so they are, in their own way, creative works.